Hi, everyone. So, I'm going to be talking about Pitch Perfect, but specifically through a queer lens. Just to give a brief summary of what Pitch Perfect is, it's a musical comedy film about Becca, a freshman who is pressured into joining her university's all girls a cappella group, the Bellas. And after a disastrous performance with a lot of throw up everywhere, the group must rebuild with new recruits, including Becca, who clashes with the group's traditional style. Becca eventually helps the Bellas find a new, modern sound, and they compete against their male rivals, the Troublemakers, to win the national championship. So when most people think of Pitch Perfect, they think of it as this fun, goofy musical comedy about a cappella. But once you actually start paying attention to how gender and sexuality show up in the movie, you realize there's a lot more going on underneath the surface. And then I also wanted to give a brief introduction to the characters that I'm going to be discussing in this presentation. So there's Becca, who's the main character of the movie, and Chloe, Fat Amy, Cynthia Rose, and I briefly mentioned Stacy. All of these girls are members of the Barden Bellas. And then there's Jessie, who is Becca's love interest throughout the film, and Bumper, who are both members of the Troublemakers. I also briefly mentioned Benji, who is Jessie's roommate and who initially auditioned for the Troublemakers but was denied. And then once Bumper left the Troublemakers, Benji took his spot. And then I also mentioned John Smith, who is a commentator along with Gail at all the a cappella shows. And yeah, that's everyone who I'm addressing. I just wanted to give a brief background in case you're not familiar with this movie. So let's start with the Barden Bellas because they're the focal point of the whole movie. The original Bellas are polished, perfect, and super traditionally feminine. They basically look like they stepped out of this catalog for what society thinks women should be, like being thin, being pretty, sexy, and well-behaved. Then the new Bellas form, and suddenly they're a group of total misfits, kind of like Becca herself. But instead of developing each girl, the movie immediately slaps labels on them, like the ugly dork, the tomboy, the slut, the fat one, the lesbian, or the foreign girl. It's like the humor depends on us immediately recognizing these stereotypes. Even though the movie stereotypes the Bellas, something really magical happens with this new group, and that is they form a community. This is actually one of the most queer-coded parts of the whole film. Many LGBTQ plus people talk about building chosen family, or the people who accept you fully when the outside world doesn't. People who are also misfits in some way, but who create belonging with each other. And that's exactly what the Bellas become. Instead of trying to put themselves back in that perfect, overly feminine mold, they slowly start embracing each other, and their weirdness becomes a bonding point. Their little a cappella circle becomes a safe space where being loud, awkward, messy, or too much is completely accepted. They essentially build their own version of a queer chosen family, where the people who don't fit in anywhere else finally find acceptance. That's a very queer narrative, and even if the movie doesn't label it that way. Now let's get into Chloe, which honestly is one of the bigger queer conversation points around this movie. So from the beginning, Becca and Chloe have more chemistry than Becca and Jessie do. Their first meaningful interaction is literally while they're naked in the shower together. Chloe hears Becca singing, corners her mid-conditioner, and convinces her to join the Bellas. It's really intimate for two people the movie insists are just friends. Meanwhile, Becca and Jessie have this very standard, very predictable straight romance. It's cute, but it's kind of bland. So fans begin shipping Becca and Chloe because their dynamic felt much more alive and emotionally charged. And Universal Studios definitely noticed how huge the Chloe fan base was. And in the sequels, they tease it even harder, but never follow through. That's why a lot of people call it queer baiting, because the movie plays with this queer tension to appeal to queer viewers without ever giving real representation. Even Anna Kendrick has said she wanted Becca and Chloe to end up together, which I think says a lot. Going a bit more into Becca and Jesse's relationship, Jesse wants a classic movie romance. He wants Becca to watch his favorite movies, to share emotional moments, and to have this perfect cinematic love story. Becca thinks it's cheesy and cringy, and to be honest, so do I. She rejects it the whole time. But at the end, she sings the Breakfast Club theme and raises her fist in the air, just like the movie. So even though she spends the whole film pushing against heteronormativity, she eventually gives in so the movie can wrap things up with a neat straight romance, crushing all of our Bechloe dreams. So now let's talk about Cynthia Rose. So she's the only openly queer character in the movie, and she's a Black butch lesbian, which should be groundbreaking and highlight intersectionality. But the movie pretty much turns her into a stereotype right away. During auditions, the judges assume she's a guy because she dresses masculine and has short hair. The movie portrays her as hypermasculine, overly sexual, and often predatory in a comedic way. She gropes Stacy during an argument, and she tries to give fat Amy mouth to mouth when she clearly doesn't need it. These jokes rely on old, harmful stereotypes about queer and Black women being aggressive or inappropriate. Meanwhile, fat Amy keeps dropping lines like, "Let's be honest," hinting at outing her for laughs. Instead of being a fully developed queer character, Cynthia Rose ends up treated as a punchline, which is very disappointing. On the other hand, you have the Troublemakers, the all-male a cappella group. None of them are queer, zero. They are aggressively straight-coded to the point that it almost feels insecure. Bumper, their leader, is hyper-masculine, egotistical, and constantly belittles others. He mocks Sweet Benji for liking magic tricks because it's not manly, even though the entire group is literally choreographing mashups and matching outfits. The movie never questions this. Instead, the men keep performing straightness in a way that tries to shut down any potential queerness or vulnerability. Then there's the commentary team, John and Gail. John spends the whole movie and the sequels making misogynistic jokes. He says women are about as good at a cappella as they are at being doctors. And he comments on the Bella skirts, calls their uniforms hot, and is completely shocked that an all-female group could be good. Gail literally calls him a misogynist on air, but the movie treats it as funny rather than serious. This adds to the theme that women, especially unconventional women like the Bellas, have to constantly prove themselves to be taken seriously. That Amy brings in another layer, camp. Her performances are theatrical, exaggerated, and intentionally ridiculous. Classic camp. She rips open her shirt, goes over the top in choreography, and refuses to shrink herself to fit societal expectations. Even though the movie uses her for jokes, she expresses the kind of bold, unapologetic creativity that's very aligned with queer culture. Also, she calls herself Fat Amy, so, quote, "skinny bitches can't do it behind her back," which kind of mirrors how queer communities reclaim certain slurs as empowerment. So I chose Pitch Perfect as the focal point of this assignment because, as weird as it sounds, it was my family's favorite movie growing up, and it continues to be my favorite movie till this day. Not to say that it isn't deeply problematic, homophobic, and misogynistic. So when we look at Pitch Perfect through a queer lens, the movie becomes a lot more complicated. It underscores queer aesthetics and queer dynamics like chosen family, camp, female relationships, and misfit culture. But it also relies on stereotypes, avoids real queer relationships, and ends with the safe, straight storyline. In the end, Pitch Perfect wants the fun and the flair of queerness, but not the actual responsibility of representing queer people authentically.